Hello and welcome to The Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. Today, we have with us a notable litigator and political analyst, Robert Barnes. And the election is really round the corner, less than 6 weeks. And the polls still show, to me, surprisingly, I have to say I'm truly baffled, Biden is still ahead. I don't know why. I think Biden has shown nothing whatever to qualify him to be president, but nonetheless, he's ahead. Now, Robert, you've been consistently saying that you think Trump will win. Are you still saying that Trump will win?
Absolutely. I think it's about 75% chance. Well, I think that there's a curveball with whoever he picks for the Supreme Court that could end up influencing the election. Putting that aside, I think otherwise he's on track still for about a 75% chance for two reasons. One is I think the polls are increasingly unreliable. Outside of the French parliamentary elections, they've been bad almost everywhere. Bad in the UK in 2015, in 2010, in 2017, in 2016, 2019. And then I bet in almost every one of those British elections against the polls and made money. Same with a lot of elections throughout. I mean, there were some recent elections in Italy, which they got wrong. Either they underestimated the left or underestimated the right. The usual common denominator is they underestimate whoever the populist candidate is. For the most part. This even includes Latin American polling that's been badly off. So I think that the polling will, and right now Trump is tracking closer to Biden in the polls than he was to Hillary Clinton at this same time frame in 2016. For folks that don't know, the polls didn't start to get narrower until the very, very end. And that was only the national polls. The statewide polls were predicting 7-8 point wins for Hillary in Wisconsin, and Michigan, and Pennsylvania, 10 point win in Minnesota. It was close in Iowa and Ohio, according to the polls. He won by 8 in Iowa, won by 8 in Ohio, then almost won Minnesota, almost won New Hampshire, where the polls were saying he was 10 points down, almost won Maine, where the polls were saying he was 10 points down. So the other thing is, probably the biggest class divide in American politics since 1948 is what's coming. The gap between working class America, and this is even across the board. Trump is doing much better than most Republicans normally do amongst working class African American men, working class Mexican American men, as well as working class white men. But you're seeing a gap of anywhere as high as 50 to 60 points. Now, as you go to your most blue collar area, then you go to your most Starbucks latte area, your Whole Foods shoppers. You're seeing 50 to 60 point gaps. And the thing is, the Whole Foods shoppers are the ones who answer all the polls. Your plumbers and your truck drivers just don't care to answer polls. They're usually on the do not call list. So that's the last thing they want to hear from. So I think the polls will have the worst error rate they've ever had since 1948, which for people who don't know, 1948, the polls estimated Truman would lose by 9 points. He won by 9 points. So that's the gap. I think that's what's coming. I think the debate next week is going to be interesting. But there was a good theory that a British commentator had that what debates are really about is their voters are looking to confirm something they already suspect. Well, if that's the case, that means they're just going to be watching the three debates to see Biden do one of his senior moments. And the risk of that's got to be high. I bet everybody in the Democratic Party is sweating like mad. And Trump's already saying that, look, if he looks normal, it's because they drugged him up. I want a drug test. So, Trump's doing Trump.
Right.
And Trump's prepared for these debates because all he does is sit down with people who hate him and give long interviews. So he's all ready, whereas Biden has been avoiding every interview possibility that could come at him. So I think if Biden has a major screw-up moment, that's when the polls will break and everybody knows Trump will do well. If Biden manages to hold up, and during Democratic debates, he mostly held up. He would have one moment every debate, but it wasn't so glaring as to crush him. If he doesn't have a total fall on his face moment, a Gerald Ford falling down this flight of stairs moment, then, where Chevy Chase is making fun of him for 2 years on Saturday Night Live all the time, then I think Trump, it will show Trump is behind I still think on Election Day he wins. But if Biden has a complete fall, that's what I'm recommending for betting market people. Bet Trump now because he's more likely to go up rather than down in the betting markets between now and Election Day.
But in fact, in the history of debates, there haven't really been too many disastrous moments. I mean, there was the famous Gerald Ford, as you said, in 1976, when he said there's no Soviet domination in Eastern Europe, which was a total disaster for him.
Yes.
And of course there was the famous Dan Quayle and Lloyd Benson, which wasn't really that important since it was a VP debate. But it's not that common that there's a total catastrophe for a candidate. So Biden could just slide through.
I think 2/3 chance that Biden looks okay, because he mostly survived the Democratic debates. I remember when that last debate with Bernie Sanders, everybody was predicting he was going to be a disaster one-on-one. He was okay. I mean, that's where Trump is pitching hey, he's drugged up. They're doing what they did with Kennedy. They're sticking something in him before he gets up there. That routine. But whatever it is, like Hillary, for example, did whatever health problems she was having, she did very well in the debates. He came across very effectively. Now, I thought Trump won those debates solely by not losing them. And I think that, as Trump came across as normal enough for people to feel okay voting for him, and he had that one great moment that Hillary would be in jail when she made the mistake of opening her mouth on that. But you're right. I mean, for the most part, outside of, like Reagan's comeback to Mondale, he had a poor first debate. Second debate, he did I will not make fun of my opponent's lack of experience and youth. It's classic Reagan. Ask him, they prepared him for it. But you're right. Otherwise, debates, the only other impact of debates was when Ross Perot got to participate in 1992. He went from single digits to double digits. But that's where I don't think the debates will actually change anything. But there's probably a 1 in 3 chance, because of how bad Biden has been at times, that he'll remind everybody maybe we shouldn't have a dementia candidate that close to the nuclear button.
Right. It is a strange campaign because that the Democrats are running, which is that Biden would be so much more effective than Trump in handling COVID. And then you look at Biden, who just simply seems out of it and, just seems to be kind of a man in serious physical and mental decline. And why would people believe that he would be a far more effective manager of the COVID crisis? It just seems a strange line to run.
Oh, I agree entirely. I mean, and in fact, I think they gambled too heavily on putting all their chips in on COVID, because it's led them to not run a traditional campaign. They ran a sort of a boring Zoom convention. They're not going out there doing organizing events. And the key thing is, it's one thing to have Biden hiding in the basement under the guise that he's trying to protect America from the spread of COVID. It's another thing. They're not even putting people on the ground. So the door knockers, the organizers, phone callers, the ralliers, none of them are doing anything, and that's why Democrats are bleeding badly in voter registration all across the country. So usually they have massive voter registration drives on college campuses right now. It's not happening. So I think they're going to regret putting all their chips in on the COVID mantra. I always thought their better pitch was Joe's empathetic and he's less crazy than Trump, and just make it that simple. Not get into you let Joe talk too much, and he talks about relocking down the country, which people are fatigued with. And you're right. Fundamentally, comes across as, it's because you're in a health asylum doesn't mean you want the insane part of the asylum managing the rest of us. And that's how, unfortunately, Biden comes across.
No, that's exactly right. One thing I was going to ask, there was an article in the New York Times a few days ago, you probably saw it, which said that Trump has problems with white voters. In other words, back in 2016, he won something like 58% or whatever it was of the white vote. He's gone down significantly since then. Now, he's made up for it by doing better among African Americans and among Latino voters. But you still wonder whether you can afford to lose that many white voters and be able to make up for it by attracting voters from minorities. Well, what did you make of that article?
I think what's going to happen is, when the polls were wrong in 2016, they badly undercounted Trump's support amongst working class whites. So I think that's where it's going to go, though. A key group for Trump is two groups. It's working class industrial rights. There's been polls done out of Macomb County, Michigan, Monroe County, Michigan, Erie County, Pennsylvania, Bucks County, Pennsylvania. He's doing very well amongst your industrial working class whites. In fact, he's outperforming his 2016 numbers. That means the next big group for him is the old anti-war group in America, overwhelmingly Norwegian in parts of Minnesota, western Wisconsin, and then your old northern working class, rural working class, which has always been anti-war, places like New Hampshire, places like Maine, northern New Hampshire, northern Maine especially. And if he can hold his anti-war vote, and because he's doing well with the industrial working class vote, I think he's going to have an actual easy night with the Electoral College. assuming he doesn't face massive lawsuits and we don't have other peculiarities with however mail voting occurs. As long as too many dead people don't vote, I think he's okay.
But that sort of segues into what's going to happen on election night. So we're assuming, let's say, Trump builds up a handsome lead on election night, and then the counting goes on. I mean, all those mail-in votes, the counting goes on and on and on. What happens then?
The biggest risk for him is that Michigan, Pennsylvania, Nevada, and now maybe Wisconsin are going to allow votes to be counted up to 2 weeks after Election Day, including not just counting, but receiving the votes up to 2 weeks after Election Day. That's going to be the big Supreme Court challenge. That's why if he doesn't have a fifth vote for him by that time to say, no, you have to count the votes on Election Day, or at least the ballot has to be received by Election Day, that's his real risk of theft. Now, I think that they won't attempt to try to steal the election if it's 2 points or more that Trump wins by on election night. But if it's less than 2 points, he's at real risk because everywhere they're going to see it. I was a Democrat a long time, most of my life, and the Grundy County, Tennessee director told me, I asked him how he always got the exact numbers they wanted at a certain precinct. And he said, well, Bobby, it's not who votes that counts, it's who counts the votes who count. There's higher risk of that this election than ever. And either way, I think if it's really close, half the country is going to think whoever the declared winner is stole it, no matter which winner it is.
Right. So how would that work? What would be the mechanism? He would seek court injunctions to stop counting?
Yes. So it'd be like Bush v. Gore, but on steroids. So they're already trying to go up to the Supreme Court, but they want a fifth vote before they get to the Supreme Court, trying to order that the states can only count votes that came in on Election Day and can't count any votes that came in after Election Day. That's the real big risk of a lot of funny things happening with votes. When a vote can show up 2 weeks late, then being able to prove that's a problem.
Right. And particularly, as you say, it's going to be in those battleground states. So it's like, if they're just still counting in New York or California, well, who cares? But if it's in the battleground state, then it's a big deal. And what would the effect be if to go back to what we talked about earlier, if Amy Barrett was sitting on the Supreme Court? How would she rule, do you think?
I think there's two problems for him. One is Barrett may not get through the nomination process. Then he doesn't have a fifth Supreme Court vote, and that means they will be counting votes for 2 weeks after Election Day in all likelihood. And the second is that she may not vote with him. She has a very authoritarian, defer-to-government approach. If you're for lockdowns, why don't you say, hey, whatever the state government did, we're going to let them do it no matter how crazy it may seem constitutionally or according to the federal statutes that say we're only supposed to have one election day. We're apparently going to have 15 of them. So I think he has high risk. If Barrett's on the bench, there's a high risk that Trump is not protected by the Supreme Court, and we will be counting ballots for all the way maybe up until Thanksgiving. Right. Well, that's kind of what happened with Bush v. Gore. I mean, it went on through mid-December, I think, I remember when it finally came to an end. Exactly. And if W didn't have 5 votes on the Supreme Court like he did, then they would have been counting votes through January, because that was the Democratic request, was to keep counting votes. What the Supreme Court did was they said no more counting votes. End of it. If he doesn't have a fifth vote in the Supreme Court, and he definitely can't trust Roberts to be that fifth vote, then we may be we may come Inauguration Day and not know who the president is.
What happens then? Does he continue being president?
It goes to the House. Technically, what is the House of Representatives, though not by individual member, by delegation from each state. So that's where Republicans actually still have an edge, because they control the most delegations, though it's narrow in several of them. But basically, whenever there's a dispute going back to 1824, we decide, going back to 1800 even, it's the House of Representatives who decides it. It's not like Gore could have done that. Democrats wanted him to. They decided it would look too bad for him to do so. And he decided to cash in instead.
All right. Well, that's fascinating. Well, we look forward to election night, and hope to be discussing this with you more, Robert. So thank you very much for your time. And remember, if you like The Gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.